If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Law by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the masquerade. In this episode, we shall review the companion guide for Vampire the Masquerade 5th Edition. I shall present my thoughts and opinions on its presentation and mechanics to help you better decide whether this is the sourcebook for you. 2020 was a fucking awful year. I don't think there is anyone in the world that is prepared to argue otherwise. Well, except maybe the rich, but fuck them. That isn't to say there were some positive highlights, well, for me at least. Almost all of them were relating to this podcast and the lovely people that day after day, or night after night should I say, listen and share my podcast with their friends and family, all of which find the podcast entertaining and helpful. That is all I could ever ask for, really, and I will always be eternally grateful for that. On a similar note, some Vampire the Masquerade related things did fill me with life, such as the announcement of the V5 companion guide, which was teased on the 10th of November 2020 via a slightly cryptic tweet and was unveiled 2 days later via the weekly World of Darkness News Twitch stream. Its main selling point was the return of 3 clans in the V5 setting, the Salubri, Ravno and Zumitzi, 2 of which being fan favourites and the other being the Ravnos. Whilst puzzled by the return of these clans in this companion book, I was excited all the same for more V5 material, with particular excitement towards the Salubri, as they are one of my favourite bloodlines in Vampire the Masquerade. Most people were very excited about this unveiling, as was I, until I started receiving death threats about sharing an official news article that went live about half an hour before the Twitch stream, as Twitter often forgets how diligent I am. Anyway, when the companion guide was released on the 16th of December 2020, I was very excited to start reading it, treating it as a late birthday present from the lovely people at World of Darkness. But would this companion guide bring the fun and well-written material that paralleled my own excitement? But before I answer that question and explore the companion guide in full, here are the rules to the Law by Night book reviews. I will explore snippets of the lore, mechanics and rules found within the tome. I will look as to how they are presented and easily they are conveyed to new and old players alike. As this is a review written and presented by me, all thoughts and opinions are my own, so if you disagree with something I have said, that is totally fine. It does not mean you are right and I am wrong and vice versa. As of the recording of this episode, the V5 Companion Guide is only available as a 64-page PDF via the World of Darkness website. It is 100% free to get your own copy. All you need to do is to create a Paradox Interactive account on the website. As such, I cannot make the usual comments on what the book feels and looks like and jest whether my cats assault the tome or not. That being said, my phone, which is where I am storing the PDF, is in the possession of my cat, so that is now forfeit, I suppose. Anyway, as for the layout of the book itself, I have to explain some things first. Some may know that White Wolf Publishing technically does not exist anymore. Due to some funny business surrounding the release of the V5 Camarilla and Anarch sourcebooks, amongst other things, Paradox dissolved the company and distributed the writing of V5 books between 2 companies, Modiphius Entertainment and Onyx Path, both companies having distinctive art styles and presentations of the V5 material and a close relationship with World of Darkness material. So which artistic direction style did the World of Darkness team in Stockholm take when creating the V5 Companion? Well, it is closer to the presentation of Modiphius' style, with some minor differences, mostly in the fact there are less grammar and printing errors. There are also more art than photos, which has a different and fresh style to what we have seen with V5 so far. For the most part, I am fond of this unique approach, and I am rather drawn to some of the paintings done by Outstar on pages 12, 37 and 39, which reminds me very much of the concept art for Bloodlines, which has a very clear but dirty look to them, adding a certain level of grit that I appreciate. Whilst it may seem biased for me to say that, given that I consider her a friend of mine, you should know that I do not offer compliments willy-nilly. As for the stylistic approach to the photos, if you have picked up any of the V5 or V20 books, you will feel right at home here. Mark Kelly's interpretations of the clans present in this book range from chilling to outright weird, which I think are two perfectly acceptable flavours when digesting the Salubri, Ravno and Zumitzi. I'm particularly smitten over the Zumitzi photo, especially the gorgeous use of pink, blue and purple lighting. The term for this, by the way, is bisexual lighting, which I love and adore. And if you want to argue that with me, just know that your favourite Zumitzi, Sasha Vikos, is gender neutral and probably has the same sexual preferences also. You're welcome. Moving swiftly onwards to the introduction, you are greeted with a very meh description of what is to follow. It is essentially an extended version of the contents page with some pleasantries to the community, which is nice, but it certainly lacks the usual inviting writing I am used to. Yes, it is a companion guide, and I never did honestly expect a short story or documents like the core book does, but something less bland and predictable would have been nice. The V20 companion guide has a similar introduction, but it has a lot more heart and genuine gratitude than what is conveyed in the V5 companion guide. Chapter 1 presents the Ravno, Salubri and Zumitzi clans in that order, with their role in the modern night, their disciplines and weaknesses presented also. The marketing advertised them as new clans, but that is somewhat false. They are new to the V5 setting, but they are not new to Vampire the Masquerade. They have played prominent roles in the setting in various ways, not that you would be aware of that from the way they are presented here. Starting with the Ravnos clan, this was the one I was most cautious about seeing a return. Whilst I have on many occasions stated they are one of my favourite clans, I will not deny that much of their earlier lore varied from problematic to outright offensive, a clan that was so unpopular with players that the writers attempted to wipe them off the face of the earth by having them being destroyed by the Kuei Jin and time wizards that called upon the energy of the sun. That is how unpopular the Ravnos were, that the hated kindred of the East was seen as the heroes here. However, it is the revisions made to the Ravno in revised and V20 material, mostly in the sourcebook Lore of the Clans, which I reviewed late 2020, that got me interested in the diverse clan. With the V5 companion guide, the writers had a choice. They could have fallen back to their old ways and made them stereotypical Romani kindred, or add to the diversity of the rulers of India. Instead, the writers chose the third secret option and did nothing, or more accurately, made the Ravnos a nothing clan, wiping away their cultured history and made them wanderers but without the mild racism. They must travel because of reasons that are never really explained, which, to me at least, sounds very vague and not in the vague that incites intrigue and inspiration. They did travel in previous versions, but there was a deep spiritual reason for it there. Their pain and clan compulsions raise eyebrows, and not in favourable ways. Previously, the Ravnos were easy to succumb to temptation, whether that involved stealing, eating, or outright murder. Now, they are doomed, which I say like that because the word in the book is in bold and italic, so it is really important here. It hints at the destruction of Sapphasura, the Ravnos antediluvian being nuked by the sun. Now, they cannot sleep in the same place in the same week, which is both incredibly severe and especially easy to circumvent, unless you are in torpor, I suppose, to which in that case you can go fuck yourself. The next clan is the Salubri, who are not really a clan in the modern night, but a bloodline that barely exists, due to centuries of them being hunted and destroyed by the other clans, thanks to the false propaganda fueled by the Tremere, as I fully explored in my podcast episode about the Salubri. Their dwindling numbers are accented in the writing, mainly by the lack of example concepts and the return of the idea that they may be only 7 Salubri in existence for some fucking reason, the myth that was shat on in V20 from a great height. It is a strange choice to roll the clan back into obscurity like this, and I'm unsure what purpose it is meant to serve. So long-time fans may be wondering why the Salubri were brought back as playable characters in V5. Honestly, I'm not totally sure as to why the Salubri are super popular again, but I can speculate on a couple of things. First, I know there was a sudden rise in their popularity in the community about the time my lore episode on them dropped, which may or may not be just pure coincidence, but I know there was certainly not as much discussion on them when I started doing the podcast in late 2019. Second, and perhaps most annoyingly of all, they have become a bit of a meme, because of the established lore that Tremere ate their way to power, and thus making the Salubri a yummy snack. This was funny for no more than 5 minutes, but it is a meme that has since found its way into established lore and their clan weakness. You see, If you use a discipline as a Salubri character in V5, you are quintessentially fucked. Your third eye bleeds, and other vampires, regardless whether they are friend or foe with Hunger 4, have to roll to resist drinking it. The stronger the discipline power, the more it bleeds. Furthermore, the blood of the Salubri is extra delicious, which may cause you to frenzy and not want to stop drinking it, for Salubri blood is addictive also. And when I say any discipline causes this bleeding to occur, I do not mean the signature disciplines Obeah or Valoren, or the use of Auspex, which was the case with practically every version of Vampire the Masquerade before V5, I mean any discipline. The use of Auspex or the Salubri specific disciplines would cause the eye to open and glow, and would only bleed once you got to the level 2 power of the aforementioned disciplines, not all the time. If you thought the Ravnos was too easy, don't worry, cause the Salubri have got you covered with the masochist mode thanks to the helping hand of internet memes. In case it wasn't apparent, I do not like this change. If you wanted to instill a sense of danger with the Salubri, make players feel they are a dying breed, and that the whole world and their aunt is against them. Making their blood extra tasty is perhaps the weirdest way to do it, especially when you consider their main gimmick, a literal third glowing eye, are 2 major masquerade breaches in the previous versions. You couldn't cover it up either, unless you wanted to increase the difficulty of certain roles. Combined with only being able to feed on those who are willing without dominate, and you have yourself a hard time on your hands. Only the Salubri have dominate now because reasons? Probably because their new weakness was too difficult and they needed to balance it out. A difficulty spike that could have been totally avoided, but don't worry, we will get onto disciplines in a moment. Finally, we lead on to the Zumitzi, another clan that has had a total revisit in its lore. Here, the Zumitzi are, for the most part, old world capitalists. Now, if that sounds familiar, that is the Ventru, but without any real direction, which is kind of the feeling I'm getting with the V5 interpretation of the Zumitzi. They are not fiends that try and perfect the vampiric condition by careful and twisted use of vicissitude, nor are they the Dracula tales of old, vampires that sleep in the soil with deep spiritual connections with the land, whose souls are bound to a fucking demon. Now, they are referred to as dragons, but with none of the terrifying fire, but a lot of hot air. Now they hoard fiends because they just want stuff to rule and control for the sake of it. Yes, the voivodes, the strongest of elders of the clan, do in fact rule over large portions of land like this, but that is not their main feature. Again, I will reiterate their spiritual connections to the land and perfecting the vampiric condition that is shockingly absent in the companion guide. Gone is their tie to Kapala, one of the biggest events in Vampire the Masquerade lore, a change that has no explanation or hint as to why this occurred or that it even existed. The Zumitzi are obsessive, yes, but not about if their haven is surrounded by enough pretty things. As I write this section, I predict with shocking accuracy that many of you will tell me that one does not need to know all the lore to enjoy Vampire the Masquerade. You don't even need to know the basics. You can learn how to play as you play, so you'll learn as the character does. It is organic and it is fun to learn the world of Vampire the Masquerade this way. I will mention, however, that much of the actual setup with Vampire the Masquerade, whether it is the hatred between certain clan members or the creation of the actual sects, revolves around the Zumitzi clan in some shape or form. The Sabbat in particular would not exist without the fiends. If the La Sombra were the mind, the Zumitzi are the soul. Much of the lore of Vampire the Masquerade, all 30 years of it at the time of writing, revolves around the Zumitzi clan. None of that is present here. There is nothing in this subchapter, for lack of a better term, that makes me fear the Zumitzi as I feared for them previously, or how I fear the other clans in V5. It is a bit difficult to take a fleshy draconic Ventru landlord with a hoarding disorder seriously. What is perhaps more baffling than the inclusion of the Zumitzi in this fashion is the return of the Slacta and Vozhd, the monstrous servants and war machines of the clan, which seem oddly out of place with the now humanity-focused V5, as the Zumitzi hoarders are the emphasis now, not the metamorphosists of old. Stranger still is the lack of a mechanic to have players make a humanity roll of some description when creating either Warghoul, as there is nothing humane about their birth, as it were. But Lord by Night Guy, I hear you type furiously. There was never any mechanics to determine humanity when creating these fiends. What Zumitzi uses humanity like this? Exactly, because it has always been assumed that the Zumitzi were inhumane creatures that didn't care for this sort of thing and weren't trying to migrate into the stoic Camarilla or humane anarchs. There are exceptions, of course, but it has always been stated that said Zumitzi were in the minority. I hope this humanity issue was an oversight or hint to what the writers have planned for to the V5 Sabbat book, but time will tell, I suppose. This leads me neatly to the Disciplines chapter, which is just as predictable and frustrating as I ultimately thought it would be. Obeah, Valoren, Vicissitude, and Chemistry have all become anagrams of other disciplines. As mentioned previously, the Salubri have Dominate with Auspex and Fortitude. The Zumitzi also have Dominate now, keeping with the Dragons Got to Rule vibe alongside Animalism and Protean, for which Vicissitude now lives. Chemistry has now become a part of Obfuscate, with Presence taking its place. I have spoken before about my disdain for anagrams in my V5 review, and the distilling an entire discipline into one power, and I didn't particularly want to address that here, but there are a couple of issues I have with them here. The application of Obeah and Valoren in V5 is baffling. They essentially perform the same healing power, but one heals vampires and the other heals mortals. Obeah was traditionally seen as the healing discipline, whilst Valoren is the more aggressive variant. I don't see the reason as to why to split them up like this in two different disciplines for that fact. The level 5 Vicissitude power, One with the Land, is a retconned version of a level 9 Methuselah power, a power that had great influence over the metaplot in some cases. Granting these world-altering properties to neonates is, well, quite frankly, rather odd. Chapter 3 brings some positivity now as we go over the clans and coterie-specific merits and goals. It is an interesting chapter that encourages different modes of play and ways for players to work together for great benefits, which I see as a good thing, given that tabletop role-playing games are, after all, games you play in groups with friends. This applies to the world of darkness. After all, vampires are hunters, and hunters work best in packs. That said, the strange blend between character stats and in-game lore of the Tremere merits may cause some folks headaches, and the absence of Salubri merits is a little bit disappointing. The penultimate chapter is about creating and playing as mortals and ghouls, which I would personally love to see more of in online actual plays, but that is a conversation for another time. Despite my initial shock that it took any flock of writers 2 years to implement this, especially when they were pumping out errata like there was no tomorrow during the first year of launch, it is a well-thought-out chapter and very logical. The ghoul flaws and merits are interesting, and the rules in creating them as a player or storyteller characters work very nicely with the rest of the game. I will, however, state I would have liked to have seen more ideas from V20's ghouls and revenants brought over, as not enough people consider the fact that ghouls should have lesser versions of their Domitus clan weaknesses. This, to me, is a very interesting narrative hook. Something that is also found in this chapter is the general consent section on page 59. I'm actually astounded that this is embedded so far into the book, only 5 pages before the end. 5 pages before the end! This should not be so far back, and it certainly should not exist solely in an optional companion guide. This should be on the front page of the core book, and this book for that matter. In fact, it should be on the front page of every VTM book. An errata is not good enough, and neither is a tiny warning on the back page where barely anyone will read it, especially on a PDF. The last page is the back cover. I honestly expected better. General well-being and good health are not optional luxuries in my honest opinion. On the topic of errata and additional goodies, the final section of the book is the large errata chapter, which is nice to read, and the designer's comments are appreciated, as transparency is always appreciated, as is seen some of the pretty secrets from behind the veil. However, just because something seems very nice on the surface, it does not always mean that there is much beneath it, which in this case covers the pleasant layout and gorgeous artwork. With these rule changes and updates, it is clear that the devs were thinking how they wished to balance things out. But these are also the same writers who made the Ravener's weakness laughably easy to avoid, and the Salubri's borderline suicidal. They are the same developers who have made it more difficult to obtain certain powers by increasing the number of books needed and the mental gymnastics to perform to make sure certain conditions are met before one can access a certain power, which I'm fairly certain was not the intention when discipline anagrams were initially conceptualized. The powers of kindred, the gifts of the vampire blood, and the clans that each specific Cainite belongs to do not exist in a vacuum. Each clan, each discipline, and each power has provided grandiose levels of lore, each one affecting the world of darkness, not just the world of Vampire the Masquerade. The 3 clans in this book feel they just exist for the sake of it, and it baffles me greatly. Why bother revisiting the metaplot and bring back a classic lore-driven tabletop role-playing game to the limelight, only to disregard it in an official companion guide? for a free PDF, this book does provide a lot of substance, adding some much needed info about the implementation of ghoul and mortal characters in your sessions of Vampire the Masquerade, but the information on the clans and revised discipline powers are incredibly underwhelming and muddy the waters about V5's direction as a product. It is unsure whether it is a Vampire the Masquerade update or a reboot. If you love Vampire the Masquerade and the direction it is going in, you will adore this product, I am sure. As much as I enjoy V5, whenever there is a change to the metaplot, I like to have these reasons soaked in a pool of juicy lore. Vampire the Masquerade is a game about story, an ongoing narrative that has lasted 30 years, but it feels like we have just stopped on a rather long but shallow chapter with the companion guide. Cult of the Blood Gods, the previous book review that I did, showed a masterclass how to modernise and make various bloodlines and clans that are notoriously difficult to roleplay accessible, whilst retaining their unique brand of horror. The only thing that the V5 companion guide has mastered is leaving me confused and disappointed, as it obsesses over unnecessarily drastically changing established material whilst presenting uninspired, half-finished ideas, which is as lazy as it sounds. I know the Vampire the Masquerade writers that worked on this project can do better. I just hope they can do the same with future material, or just let Onyx Path do everything. And for those of you who are new to the Lore by Night brand and the reviews I occasionally do, I do not do out of 10 scores because they are subjectively pointless. One person's 10 out of 10 is another's 3 out of 5 stars, which is another's minus 42 out of 100. So I shall rate this book Stokers out of 10, which is just as helpful as a proper out of 10 score. To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we will upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, as you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.